welcome everybody to our meeting. This afternoon, we've got Estelle Marshall, who's going to talk about a study of people with HSP around diagnosis and treatment. So Estelle, I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Adam. So most of you know me by now, but a little bit of background, who I am. So I'm a physiotherapist from background, qualified in 2002, which is a long time ago, now retired due to ill health. I was diagnosed with HSP in 2018 and decided that I would do my master's. So this is the dissertation. This is the research for my master's. It was with the questionnaire, there was just over 100 people filled it in, which is a really good response rate. So thank you everybody for that. And there were 9 people interviewed, and there were more volunteers that I didn't get a chance to interview because, you know, there's only so much you can do. So really brilliant response rate. So the objectives were to identify ways to improve the diagnosis process, including support and information provided, because as we know, there's a bit of a problem. To assess what percentage of people at diagnosis were given information and provided with support. To find out what information and physiotherapy treatment is beneficial for people newly diagnosed with HSP. And explore what exercises people do regularly for self-management, and if this was influenced by previous physiotherapy treatment. Okay, so there is a physiotherapy leaning to it because that's, you know, my bread and butter. But looking at the diagnosis process, it was lengthy and difficult for a lot of people, and misdiagnosis wasn't uncommon. But what I did find surprising was that only 16% of people had prior awareness of HSP, which leaves a large majority of people being told that they've got a condition that they've never even heard of, that they don't know anything about. So that puts people in a very difficult situation. The impact of the diagnosis, I've split into 4 groups. Now, people experienced more than one. It wasn't clear-cut that somebody had a positive impact, but they sometimes also had the negative impacts. So there was an element of relief for quite a lot of people in that it wasn't something worse. And also, given how much people had to fight to get a diagnosis, some people felt a relief that they got to the end of that process and they actually had an answer. But there's an element of grief and bereavement. So a bereavement is a loss, and it's the loss of the future that you expect to have. You know, you didn't expect, you know, years ago to have a progressive condition. So that does lead into this real grief process. And it's very difficult for people when they're in that grief process to be proactive with the management and exercises. So the psychological impact has a huge influence on your physical ability to manage the condition. Okay. The people that the impact impacted the least were those that were either too young to understand when they were given the diagnosis. So there were some that were quite young and they were like, and also those that had previous misdiagnosis. So, for example, some people who've been diagnosed with MS, had already gone through this grief process and worked on actually coming to acceptance prior to being told that it's HSP rather than MS, because they'd already sort of had to come to terms with the fact that they had a progressive neurological condition, whether the name's different or not. Now, being given the diagnosis also did help some people. It helped people to plan for the future. Because like myself, I've now bought a ground floor flat that will accommodate a wheelchair. So it's that plan, it's that knowing what the future's going to hold and actually having awareness. It also allows people to do reading up on it and finding information and to get support. There were people who commented that they were basically on job seekers allowance and being given a lot of grief to be getting a job when they weren't physically able. And actually receiving the diagnosis meant that they were able to sort of say, well, actually, these symptoms I've got are real. And people would take, as well as getting support through physiotherapy, through orthotics and other things, and medication. It has had a massive impact on people's life. It's impacted relationships, impacted jobs, careers, studies, and everyday life. So, and that's something obviously that I've found in my own life, but all of us are impacted by that. So then I looked at what information people were provided with, and we already know that there's a problem with what information people are given, but 24% were given no information at all at diagnosis. So it is a real issue, and it's one of the reasons we've been looking at an information sheet for consultants to be able to give out. So there's a lot of things that this leads on to, because it points out a lot of problems that are there. Okay. So the only thing I asked about the support group in the questionnaire, the whole questionnaire, was, were you given information about the support group at diagnosis? And only 21% were. So it's quite poor, really. It's very poor. But despite the fact that that was the only question, the support group was mentioned numerous times in the open questions, and actually how important the support group is. Now, I need to, that's it. So the information gained from the support group, so these are just quotes that people have written down, has been amazing and has been a lifeline to me. I felt supported and no longer alone. The support group information was most useful. Having peers that completely get it is a huge help. Less lonely when it's labelled as a rare condition. Ways to change my previous lifestyle. So I found being a member of the Facebook group helpful. It seems people with the condition know more than the specialists. Well, that's definitely true. And asking questions. So it actually brought out of it how much the support group is very, very important, and how vital it is to be. We need that support group, but we all need to be helping the support group as well. So then I looked at what useful advice and information people would give. So a lot of people on about exercise. It's a big thing because it's the most important thing for managing the condition. It's physio and exercise. There's not much else. And another piece of information, advice I thought was really useful is make use of walking aids earlier than you might want to. And I thought that's a really good piece of advice. Don't wait until you've had so many falls, you've got serious injuries. Actually use the walking aids. And somebody put about YouTube having helpful exercises. I thought, well, this is a real good piece of information, helpful for people, because it's something I do is use YouTube. So take charge of your own destiny. Okay, and counselling, somebody suggested, which given the discussion this morning about how serious the mental health problems, how traumatic the diagnosis process, and coming to acceptance, and how important acceptance is for managing those conditions, the symptoms. Counselling is really important. Okay, and then went on to look at physiotherapy. So Fink, who's in America, describes physiotherapy as the cornerstone in treating HSP. And physiotherapy can educate on the condition, but obviously only those that actually know about it, which is why we're trying to get more. Look at walking aids, exercises, stretches, balance, strengthening, and then doing falls prevention work. So physiotherapy is very important. Can also look at whether somebody needs muscle relaxants, gait analysis. So physiotherapy is very important for HSP. So then I was looking at how many people got physiotherapy in the first year post-diagnosis, and half those did, and more than half that was from a neurophysio, which still leaves half not getting. And the overall thing that people found most beneficial for them, most helpful, is stretches. So stretching and stretching is really the key to it. So then it's walking aids next, and then it's balance exercises, okay, that people found. But people have had very different experiences of physiotherapy. So it's not straightforward. You know, physiotherapy can help massively, but the services available are limited. It's not always effective if they don't know what they're doing. It can be inconsistent or difficult to access. There's a lack of knowledge and understanding of HSP. But physiotherapy can provide help motivation. It can help tailor people's workout, and it helps improve people's quality of life. There's a huge difference between services provided in the NHS and private. So it's an area that I didn't look at in depth. It came up because a lot of people said, oh, I see this private physio, but I didn't specifically look at separate between the private and the NHS. And that's an area that could do with looking at more. But one of the things that really came across was that exercise is the key. So if you're looking at symptom management, which is all we can do really, exercise is really, really important. And people reported increased stiffness when they had not exercised. One of the things looked at was how people felt about exercise. And we'll go into that a little bit more. But when exercise was sociable and enjoyable, it was much increased motivation. So it's not just about doing exercise, it's about finding an exercise that you enjoy. And that can be, well, that's very individual and very specific to them. Okay, so different people were doing completely different things. And it was really important to look at those that found exercises, that an exercise group or something that they enjoyed doing, carried on doing it and had that motivation. Whereas if you're doing it just out of because you've got to do it, it's hard to motivate yourself. So actually 67%, is about 67%, exercised regularly. So people are quite proactive. So as stretches came out as the most important area, I wanted to just give a little bit of advice on stretching. Okay, so they need doing quite regularly, because unfortunately with spasticity it tightens back up again. So you stretch out and then you get up the next morning and it's all tight. So things that are useful are building it into your routine. So actually every day when you do a particular activity, do some stretches. Okay, holding the stretches for 30 to 60 seconds at least gives that longer time and is more effective. But it is very individual, and listening to your body is important. Stretches can be done in sitting. Okay, so you don't have to get on the floor onto a yoga mat or whatever. Heat can make stretches more comfortable. So maybe doing them in the shower or after a shower, or using a hot water bottle if you're getting quite a lot of pain in particular muscles. Yoga, there's a lot of stretching in yoga. So it is something that, although I used to think, well, I can't go to yoga because I'm not very flexible, but actually I've been going to yoga more and more. And it's really good, because although I can't get in some poses, some of them I can. Pilates, there's quite a lot of stretching going on at Pilates, and that's quite beneficial. There's also splints that can help with stretching, like night splints. And these can be provided by orthotics. Next, I've got a few diagrams, pictures of different stretches. So here we've got the calf stretches. So there's the gastrocnemius stretch, which your calf muscle basically is built up of two different muscles. So you've got one that crosses your knee and one that doesn't cross your knee. And that's why there's the two different ways of stretching out the calf muscle, one with the knee straight and one with the knee bent. And it's important to do both, because both calf muscles get tight. Okay, and then our hips. So there's a few pictures of different stretches for your hips. So for your adductors, your hamstrings, your quads, your glutes. Okay. They're just different examples of ways that you can do stretches. And some more hip stretches. Now, these are obviously normal people in this picture, so, you know, don't expect to get your leg all the way up there, because it ain't gonna happen. And also, not just stretching out your legs, but stretching out your back. So backs don't like staying still. The more stiff your back becomes, so actually a lot of people get back pain, and it's partly due to the spasticity in the legs, and the back becomes very rigid. So as we're walking, you're getting hardly any spinal movement. So your back then locks up, and it really doesn't like it. So there's a few exercises for the back. So bending, side bending, the pelvic tilting. So it's basically you're sticking your bosom out and then sticking it in. So there's a few diagrams, pictures of me demonstrating them, how to do them in sitting and lying. Okay. Then I looked at barriers to exercise. We all know exercise is important, but what's stopping us from progressing along that? What's stopping people from doing more exercise? Sometimes that's capability. So it can be that people haven't got the knowledge of what they should do. So because they're frightened of doing something wrong, they don't do anything. The physical limitations can make exercise more difficult because it's then adapting to their own needs, and reduce confidence. And some people said they haven't got the support to be able to do that. Other barriers are things like opportunity. So there's time. We're all busy with a lot of things, you know, and some people are working full time and have lots going on. And then there's the access. So it's not always easy to get there, as well as the energy. So sometimes fatigue means that people haven't got the energy to do the exercise. And then there's motivation. And motivation is impacted by many things. So pain, emotion. So along with emotion is where we are up with the grieving process. Have we come to acceptance? Because it's harder to motivate yourself to exercise when you've not got to the level of acceptance. Also, people's views of exercise is important. Because if people enjoy exercise and they see the benefit, that increases their motivation. Whereas some people, like my mother, has a very negative view of exercise already, and that's inbuilt in her, that she hates exercise. The convenience of it's important as well. You know, if it's not a convenient place, and if there are convenient classes on at the right time, that's great. That increases motivation. And if there isn't, makes it more hard. And the social aspect of it is quite important, actually, because those that I interviewed that attended like groups for disabled people, the exercise groups for disabled people got a lot from the social interaction as well. Okay, and those, it wasn't just from disabled groups. Other people found that they made friends, they were doing it. Okay, so here's some of the exercises that people were engaged in. So overall, swimming is very much number one, which is great because it's takes that pressure off because you've not got the gravity. So people were doing lots of different exercises, and actually it's, other than, you know, the stretches, the next exercise that you're doing other than stretches can be anything that you enjoy and that you find helps you. So views of exercise, and this was quite important and quite varying as well. So there were some people who found it very beneficial, that they enjoyed it, and they found it motivational being with others. A lot of people said about that it was much easier to motivate themselves to exercise when they went somewhere. So when they went to an exercise group, and trying to motivate themselves in the house was much harder. So, but a lot of people said about how much better they felt that they could move, they exercised. There were other people that felt that it was a chore, and there were a lot of different barriers. So like we said, about the time and the motivation. Okay, so then we'll go into the key findings. So the diagnosis process, it was long and difficult for many, and those with a known family history had a more straightforward diagnosis process. But only 16% had any awareness of HSP prior to diagnosis. The impact of diagnosis, the grieving response experienced by many and impacted self-management. Information provided at diagnosis is very limited, and 24% were given no information at all. The HSP support group was valued by people with HSP, because despite the fact they only asked one small question on the support group, whether you were informed about it, there were so many comments. You know, I've put a few there, but there were masses more. So it's a shame that only 27% were informed about the support group at diagnosis. The impact of physiotherapy. Physiotherapy has the potential to really help, but because of the type of condition it is, the most important thing that physiotherapy can do is actually to help people with a self-management long term, because they're not able to provide long-term services. And there were people that were interviewed, there were quite a few people, the ones that were interviewed, actually were still doing some of the exercises that they'd been given from a physiotherapist years before, because they were exercises they felt the benefit, could see the benefit of them and the importance of them. And the limitations of the NHS really came across as well. So exercise is just the most important thing for the self-management. But what came across there was actually that stretches were overall very important. But then the next, it's important to do other exercise as well. But it's important to do something you enjoy. Ideally, something that's sociable. And it improves quality of life as well as management of symptoms. Because actually, it's about living well. It's about enjoying life. So when I interviewed people, living a productive life really came across. Because like myself, many people have had to give up work early due to the HSP. But people still want, too young to sit and do nothing. People don't want to sit and do nothing. And people didn't define themselves by their disability either. It was people are who they are, not HSP. Okay. Has anybody got any questions?
Well, Estelle, I will firstly say thank you very much for that presentation. It's absolutely brilliant.